Welcome, everyone. I'm Megan Claire Chase, the Partnership Director at Grid Health. The pandemic has highlighted barriers and disparities in healthcare and amplified the need to address them. This includes clinical trials, which have a history of underrepresentation. Bristol Myers Squibb and Grid Health have teamed up to launch Diversity in Oncology. This initiative is being developed with the voices of the underrepresented communities living different experiences. Throughout a series of 4 live interactive sessions, we envision highlighting and raising awareness of the health disparities in oncology to create structural changes in clinical trials. I had the honor of moderating the first session in October, where patients and caregivers shared their experiences and challenges they have faced navigating their care. The recorded version of that session is live on the platform for everyone to watch at any time. Today, at our second session, our panelists are diverse physicians and principal investigators, and we will be learning and discussing their experiences in clinical research and hearing about some of their stories of how they navigate health for themselves and family members. The goal of this session is to create a safe space for courageous and necessary conversations to share lived experiences and ways to improve access to diverse patients, greater patient choice and satisfaction, and better provider and patient communication. Feel free to interact via the chat at any point in the session. Make sure you select everyone. And we would like to also thank the project team at BMS for how genuine they are in thinking of and working together on this project. Their authenticity and focus on hearing the real experiences from the people living them to create change based on those experiences is what makes us proud to be partners with them on this initiative. It's time together we move from rhetoric to real action. So to kick things off, we want to introduce you to our keynote speaker and moderator, Lorena Carey. Lorena is the head of diversity strategy at Bristol Myers Squibb and has been leading the diversity and clinical trials effort since 2019, with the objective of recruiting patient population that reflect both demographics of the real world and represent the epidemiology of the diseases being studied. Prior to working at BMS, she spent several years in Latin America and Canada region in Novartis, where she started her career in pharma back in Mexico over 15 years ago. As a strong inclusion advocate, she leverages her experience, intersectionality, and personal purpose. She is fluent in Spanish, English, and Portuguese. Lorena is a current board member for Women of Color in Pharma and an award winner of the Red Shoe Movement. She's also part of her hometown diversity committee to build an inclusive culture that values differences and serves all populations. Lorena was awarded the 2020 People en Español magazine recognition, celebrating women who have made a difference, empowering others. During her spare time, she loves to sing and is an active member of her community and church. Lorena, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, MC. I am honored and I am inspired today. I am inspired since 3 weeks ago when I heard the session from patients where they shared their experiences, how they have gone through their journey within the clinical trial and how their patient care has impacted them and the caregivers. Thank you for your introduction and thank you for the great team and also for the panelists that will be with us today, whom I will be learning and sharing some questions and insights that we have put together. You said it right. My role is, I am the head of clinical trial diversity for Bristol Myers Squibb. And that means that clinical trial diversity is my full-time job. And clinical trial diversity is as well something that I am very fond of, because for the number of years that I was working in the past, I was exposed to the impact that the need for more clinical trial diversity has in the way that we provide care for patients in different countries around the world. I am a firm believer that there is a moral imperative in us addressing this important task. But now in this role, I have learned so much about this being also a scientific and epidemiologic imperative. So we provide the right efficacy and safety to all of the patients. And as said before, in 2020, it was highlighted more than ever. That need for greater clinical trial diversity was something that everybody was talking about. Interestingly, and luckily for me, I'm in a company that has been looking into it way before the pandemic started. And it's important because as a caregiver, as a friend, as a daughter, and as a sister of patients, I care, right? I care and I have experienced their journeys, and I want to be part of the solution that improves it. We all have a responsibility and a role to help address health inequities. We have heard from patients. We are in that forefront. We are collaborating with many other stakeholders within the life sciences industry. We are working to ensure that health equity is for everyone. We're trying to continue breaking down the barriers for clinical trial participation, all the way from where we run our trials to who is running the trials. We are looking into data, epidemiology, eligibility criteria, and all those things that beyond the logistics themselves end up being a burden for patients. We need to ensure that that clinical trial population is reflective of the real world and aligned with that epidemiology, so it serves the patients in need. Partners are critical in this endeavor, and this is one of the multiple examples. You will see us collaborating with other big pharmas, biopharmas, CRO partners, institutions, advocacy groups, community outreach organizations, because we know that if we want to rebuild this trust, and if we want to educate, if we want to generate more awareness between patients and caregivers about clinical trials, even before they are in need of becoming a clinical trial participant, we need to do it together. We need to build these drivers for change. We need to be consistent with our cultural competency. We need to be humble. We need to understand that we all have our own biases as industry partners, as patients, as caregivers. We need to be open for feedback, and we need to be open for true stories and authenticity. So the way that we have been doing this at selecting our site partners and our investigator partners is just one of the many components of our robust program. And we know that we're just starting. For these past 2.5 years, I have been very passionate about this. And I am looking forward to the moment that roles like mine are no longer needed. This is why today I am extremely excited about sharing the screen, the Zoom, and the room with my partners in crime who will be sharing as well their experiences. So with that, once again, I would like to thank you all for joining and asking for a very active participation through the chat, through the questions at the end of the session, through the polling surveys that we have at the beginning. And once again, to my fellow panelists, thank you. Please be comfortable enough. Please be open, share, and welcome. Welcome again. With that, let's start. I believe that the first thing that we have right now are 3 polling questions. Because as MC said before, a month ago, we had this similar session with some of our, with some patients and caregivers. Very insightful and very open session. These are The questions that we will put on the screen right now are polling questions and are only for the audience members who have been a cancer patient, survivor, family, friend, or caregiver. And I believe that the great team, especially Jessica, will help me pop these questions up as I read them. So I will read the first question and I will give you some time to respond. I can be open and truthful with my medical team. And as you see, there are different options for you to respond. Thank you so much. I see that people is chiming in and oh, there's a lot of numbers popping up. That is great and I appreciate that. So the results from this question, I see that 50% of the participants have joined. So I think that that's a good number. We have a somewhat agree. It depends on how we see the glass, right? It can be half full or half empty. But thank you. It's also inspiring to see that there are some agrees and strongly agrees in the responses. I think that this is something interesting that we will definitely tap into as we continue our discussion. The second question, if Jessica can help me putting up, I believe that a physician or principal investigator leading a clinical trial has my best interest in focus. I'm not sure that you can read the rest of the question, but that's what it says. I believe that a physician or principal investigator leading a clinical trial has my best interest in focus. So at this time, we are seeing that the respondents are answering faster than the past one because we have almost 50% by now. And thank you. As surprising as it is to see some strongly agrees, it is not surprising to see some disagrees in their responses. But it makes me feel a little bit better that there is some level of comfort on this initial belief. And again, we will also tap into solutions or proposed strategies to better improve these and increase this sense of confidence and trust and relations. And our third and last polling question, I will read it. Thank you, Jessica. I believe that a pharmaceutical company sponsoring a clinical trials has my best interest in focus. Please be as open as you want. That's why we are here. This is a safe space. I believe that a pharmaceutical company sponsoring a clinical trial has my best interest in focus. I can only say thank you for being so authentic and so honest. And as I said before, there is a long road for all of us to walk, right, and to continue. We need to assure as we move forward and as we progress as a collaborative in this effort, that we see more agrees, strongly agrees, and truly make patients feel that this is what we want to do, like to continue keeping their best interest in focus. Thank you for those who participated in these polling questions. I appreciate it. And with that, and if I just get a yes by MC, I will continue and introduce the presenters, to the panelists today. So please forgive me because I will read. The resumes are impressive. And I will start first of all with Dr. Isabel Prishagul. Thank you, Dr. Isabel Prishagul. She is the Assistant Attending Thoracic Oncology Service at MSK Cancer Center. She is attending on the Thoracic Medical Oncology Service at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Her main research focus is on predictive prognostic biomarkers for response to immunotherapy and targeted therapies. She has a passion for patient advocacy, education, and identifying and addressing healthcare disparities. Dr. Prishagul received her Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine from Lake Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine and a Master of Biomedical Sciences from Rutgers University School of Biomedical Sciences. She completed her residency of internal medicine from Icahn School of Medical at Mount Sinai, and her fellowship in hematology oncology at North Shore University Hospital, Long Island, Jewish Medical Center, Northwest Health. Thank you, Dr. Prishagul, and looking forward to talking to you. Then we have Dr. Estela Mari Rodriguez. Dr. Estela Mari Rodriguez, the AD Community Outreach and Co-Lead for the Thoracic Site Disease Group at Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center. She is an Associate Director of Community Outreach and Co-Lead of this disease group at the NCI designated Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. She has a special interest in the early phase of clinical trials and is an active member of the Experimental Therapeutics Program at Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center. Dr. Rodriguez received her bachelor's degree from Columbia College and her medical degree from State University of New York, Downstate College of Medicine. She completed her internal medicine residency at Columbia University's New York Presbyterian Hospital and her medical oncology fellowship at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Rodriguez also has a master's degree in public health from the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid in España, and she has given numerous lectures as invited speaker on issues related to lung cancer and healthcare disparities. Thank you very much, Estela Mari, for joining us. And last but not least, we have Dr. Dana Jackson, pediatric neuro-oncologist from National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Strokes and NIH. She's a board-certified pediatrician and pediatric hematologist oncologist with a clinical expertise and research efforts related to the blood-brain barrier and malignant glioma. Dr. Jackson's clinical practices focuses on enhancing drug delivery of systemic agents for pediatric malignant brain tumor patients to improve treatment response and survival. Dr. Jackson is a driven clinician scientist with an enthusiasm for research, a commitment to inspiring youth to pursue careers in STEM, and the passion for achieving racial equity with the biomedical field. Her passion for science stems from an early love of astronomy and chemistry linked with her personal journey as a thyroid cancer survivor. This experience deeply influences her empathy towards patients and families, motivates her cancer research studies, and compels her to ensure equity, diversity, and inclusion, and how it is paramount with STEM. She attended Hampton University, where she received her Bachelor of Science Molecular Biology, and then obtained her MD from Eastern Virginia Medical School. Dr. Jackson subsequently completed a residency in pediatrics at Orlando Health, and then completed the 3-year fellowship in pediatric hematology oncology at St. Jude's. Additionally, she completed a 2-year joint fellowship in pediatric neuro-oncology and clinical pharmacology at Johns Hopkins Medical Institute before being selected as an NCA assistant clinical investigator in the Clinical Investigator Department Program 2015. In 2018, she was selected as an NIH Distinguished Scholar, and in 2020 was promoted to an NINDS NCI Tenure Track Investigator. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Jackson, and welcome. So you guys can imagine how many palpitations I feel right now by being joined today to this empowering session, because it is an honor to be surrounded by people who is in the forefront of addressing health equity, who truly believes on clinical trial diversity, who has been doing this as their daily job, facing patients, families, challenges within their site and their own journeys. So with that, thank you very much. And let's start with the questions that I have. The first one, and I would like to go back to what we shared before, refers to what we heard during our initial session with patients. Whereas you participated on it live or you heard it later with the recording, I wanted to know, did you learn something new about how patients or family members experience clinical trials? Did you got any additional insights from these interactions? Is there something that you would like to share? But before that, sorry, I forgot. Understand if I am nervous today. I wanted to hear from you why clinical trials is important, why clinical trial diversity drives you. So why don't I start with Dr. Prishagul?
It is such an honor to be here. I am truly humbled to be in this room with all of you, and I look forward to learning from all of you. I hope you come off mute and you talk and you teach me something today, because I know I'm going to leave here a changed person. With that being said, a little bit about why diversity is important to me. I think because, as we all know too well, in oncology, one size does not fit all. And it is so essential to know that, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, people, of different gender, different ages, we all experience drugs differently. And knowing this information and analyzing it and having it on hand will allow us to not only choose a treatment that may be more efficacious for you, a treatment that would not affect your quality of life, and also decrease any potential toxicity. So any information that I have to do that and to help you is essential to me. And when I see that a clinical trial and the data has read out, it only includes, such and such gender, such and such ethnicity, such and such age groups, I think we're leaving out the most important thing, which is the person that's in front of you today well represented in that trial? And if they haven't been, then we've been doing something wrong. And that's what drives me.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Prishagul. Dr. Jackson?
She stole my answer. So I'm also very grateful to be here and to be a part of this panel. And I definitely resonate with what Dr. Prishagul just said. It made me think about a time when I was in the grocery store during my neuro-onc fellowship in Baltimore. And I was tired from the day, but I still had my ID badge on. And I remember the person was bringing up my groceries in the grocery store. And she said, "Oh, you work at Hopkins?" I was like, "Oh, yes." I don't think I went into detail what I did for a living, but I was like, "Yes." And she was like, "I can't go there. They experiment on people over there." And I remember thinking, oh, I could say something profound right now, but I'm too tired. And I didn't say anything. But now looking back at it, so this was a young Black female. And so we know that there is some distrust in the medical system from various communities of color, just in terms of really thinking that at Hopkins and other large academic institutions, people are experimenting on each other. Now I can say, honestly, I did not say anything profound at that time. I was like, "Oh, you think so?" I think that was because I didn't feel like I was going to change her way of thinking right then and there. And maybe she truly was valid in thinking that opinion, if they experiment there, because they do experiment there. I mean, we have clinical trials that were there. But it made me want to go more into education as it relates to when my patients come in and they say, "Oh, there may or may not be a clinical trial that is available for them," to give them the best amount of knowledge around that. And so just as Dr. Prishagul says, if you qualify for it, your physician should be discussing how and why you qualify and why it's important for you to have inclusion as it relates to these trials, because there's so many great small and big questions that can be answered when you get inclusion. So we saw that at the time of putting out this COVID-19 vaccine, that the majority of the people that initially were recruited for these trials were white males. And then there were all these other coalitions that came together to say, we need some people of color represented in these trials before we get them approved. And so they did a better job. It wasn't equal representation, but it was much better. And that even helped with the trust and the inclusion to get more communities of color vaccinated.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jackson, very much. And I fully agree with what you're saying. It's going to take some time for us to bring that thought process in a different space. And it requires many of us working together. Dr. Rodriguez, would you share with us, please?
Oh, thank you. And I'm honored to be here as well. And So I'm a non-native speaker. My first language is Spanish, and I grew up in Puerto Rico and came here. And I I remember all the obstacles that I experienced going to an Ivy League school and trying to learn the language and reading things in a different language. And every time I see my patients that we talk to them about trials, talk to them about what's new, I always feel there's so many obstacles that have to do with language, so many things that are not available in some of our communities, and there's just such a big gap. And these gaps exist even in our countries in Latin America, where they're parts of our society that patients that I have treated that have enough money to get on a plane and go to a clinical trial in the Anderson, Sloan Kettering, so that there's a big divide in terms of economics. And that's one of the things that really inspires me and drives you to do this work, because I feel that everyone should have access to the best care, and especially for the science, for us to learn about patients and how to treat best patients, we have to make those trials and those treatments available to the community. So that's one of the things that drives me, and how to build that trust, be it language, kind of lowering the barriers that make it difficult for patients that don't speak the language or might have different health literacy issues. So that drives me, and I'm excited to be here, part of the conversation.
And thank you so much for what you're doing. I do hear you. As a Spanish speaker myself, going back to all the health literacy component that you're mentioning, you need to learn to be an adult again when you immigrate to a country that has a different language and a different culture. So this strange land somehow is an easier way to navigate when there is someone that mirrors you, or that looks like you, or that understands you. So thank you for what you're doing. Let me go back to the original question that I was going to ask before I forget the introduction, of course. But for those of you who were able to listen into some insights from our prior session with patients and caregivers, is there something special that you learned, that you heard, that kind of highlighted or was insightful for you in preparation for today's conversation?
I joined the discussion, and it was really eye-opening. I mean, I think the message that I got from it that really came through for me was trust, and how when there's a breakdown in the relationship between health systems and communities, it's very hard to bridge that gap. So you might, how you're perceived and how this information is being perceived, if there's no trust, or there hasn't been historical trust between the institution and the community, it's very hard to kind of start anew. So I got that out of it. And then I also, there was a big discussion about community engagement, and how we don't do a good job in the ivory tower to really involve the community in the trial development, and involve the community in kind of getting rid of the barriers that are not allowing patients to come to get those access to those trials. So it was very powerful discussion in many ways, and also it was very diverse. So I felt like I was in tune with the needs of Latino patients, and then there were members who were actually Asian American patients that had very specific needs that I hadn't really entertained. So we all have a lot to learn.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm happy to go for the next question, unless any of you guys wants to add something. But what you said about community engagement is so important, because yes, it is super relevant, but we also need to look into clinical trial diversity from design. And there's a responsibility as part of the developers and sponsor companies to look into this. So that's a great point. What I want to ask right now is related to a recent publication from the New England Journal of Medicine, Catalyst publication in 2021, in March this year. They shared how clinicians and staff are impacted as well by interpersonal racism. So I wanted to hear from you if your journey has been exposed to this, or if you have any story that could illustrate the problem of inequity in clinical medicine. Let's start with Dr. Jackson.
I had to think about that. The answer is yes. And then what story do I tell that doesn't get me enraged during this panel discussion? Oh, so I can just be honest and frank. Representation in oncology as a woman, a woman from a diverse background is very poor. To be honest, I am the only Black pediatric neuro-oncologist in the US. That's so, yes, thank you for my accolades and for the applause, but that's not okay. So I am usually the only brown face at these conferences and panel discussions. But I want to see more people that look like me. So that in and of itself, just my field of research, just my field of clinical care is limited. So when I do walk into a room and my patient just happens to identify with me racially, they're excited. And so I'm happy for them in that regard, or their family members are excited and I'm happy for them in that regard. And so, yes, maybe I am able to educate them and convince them a little bit better on participation in a clinical trial, but they're not going to always have a Sedona Jackson walking into their room. So then what do you do in that circumstance? So that's why I do have a love and a passion and interest to recruit and retain more people in this field that look like me, so that we can recruit and retain more patients that look like me. Not necessarily that I want them to have cancer, but I want them to get the best care. And maybe it's not best treatment outcome for them, but it could be for somebody who looks like them in the future, because we've done and done well in enrolling them and keeping them engaged in clinical studies.
Thank you so much. No wonder why your interest on developing STEM and all other things is so close to what you're saying. I get with your comment on you shouldn't be one of the few or the only one. So hopefully that representation increases. And people need to see what they want to be. So I'm sure that those who today are listening to this session and seeing you are inspired by what they see. Happy now to recognize it's great to see a female panel here, because it also speaks, to some stronger representation, which over the years has also been shifting. So this is great. Hopefully this is not the only one as well. Doctora Rodriguez, would you be able to share with us one of those maybe stories that could illustrate this?
Without getting enraged, okay. So when I was in college, I had the pleasure of one of my mentors was Doris Weathers, who was the first African-American woman. She was a pediatrician that did work on sickle cell disease, and she was the first woman to attend Yale Medical School. And she got me involved in a project for hydroxyurea for sickle cell, and I had to make phone calls to houses that we had contact information. And I remember making a phone call and someone on the other line telling me, basically, go back to your country, I don't understand you. So it that's always stayed with me, because I feel as an immigrant in training in the United States, as an immigrant from another culture, and as a woman, you're always, it's always very obvious to me that I don't belong in a way, because we're only 4% Hispanics in medical schools. So we're obviously not the norm. But we have so much to contribute in an area like Miami, where it's 50% Hispanic patient population. So we have a lot of work to do to kind of change perceptions and really have more of us, so that we get more patients into the system and build that trust. But it just I think every time I look at the management of big institutions and you look at the plenary sessions of these conferences, and you see a lot of very undiverse groups of administrators and undiverse groups of people in charge, I'm always kind of go back to that moment that in a way you don't belong. If you don't see people like you, it does tell you that you don't belong.
Thank you, Stella Mari. Thank you for sharing. Dr. Prishagul.
And thank you, Dr. Jackson and Dr. Rodriguez, for those stories. You definitely had my blood boiling at times, because I can definitely relate and have been in similar situations and have felt similar things. So I fully echo your thoughts. And similar to what you had mentioned, Dr. Jackson, I am celebrating you being such a rarity because you are a trailblazer, but it is absolutely not okay that you are the only one. And I hope that if we have this meeting again, and when we do, that is not the same story. But I think if anyone were to be a better trailblazer, there's literally no one better than you. So that is that. In regards to experiencing what everyone had previously shared, I think it comes down to very simple things in clinic when enrolling patients to trials, to patients up at the podium at ASCO, and physicians up at the podium at ASCO. And something that I encounter far too frequently is not having consents in a patient's native language. And that is so frustrating. And then I'm told, oh, don't worry, that's okay. We're going to get an interpreter on the phone and they'll interpret the consent, but there is just something that's missing there. And that is unfortunate. I can only imagine how scared I would be if I was in a country where I didn't speak the native language and my life was on the line and I had to understand a document that wasn't in my language by someone on the telephone explaining it to me. I'd be worried that I'd be missing something in the fine print. I would be terrified. And that is something that is a focus of mine that I hope to be able to change, because it's simple, yet I think it would help ease a lot of anxiety. It would help patients make better informed decisions, whether it was, this is definitely the right thing for me, or no, this is definitely not the right thing for me. And that is something simple that I think if everyone across the institution spent a little bit more energy on that, it would help tremendously.
Thank you for sharing. That's a key point that everyone needs to be looking into. And thank you for setting the bar so high and challenging ourselves to have, like you're saying, more trailblazers as we progress in clinical trial diversity and health equity. You mentioned health literacy, and that's something that Estela Mari was also saying, referring to the language that is spoken. I am curious about, how do you feel about that concordance factor, right? Between how the treating physician looks like and how the patient looks like. Do you think that there is somehow a better sense? Dr. Jackson mentioned that when some Black patient may see her entering into the room, that there is this sense of comfort. But do you have any other additional example or story that could reflect this? And I am also curious about how this concordance factor or sensitivity impacts beyond the language. Understanding the cultural journey or the cultural setting of pain, of diseases, of tolerance. Can you share something about that as well as a story? I see you're nodding, Dr. Jackson, so maybe I will give you the first shot.
I would say it has to be clinician dependent. So in no way would I say that I treat my Black or Brown patients any better than my non-Black or Brown patients. I'd like to think that I'm very thoughtful and very diligent with all of my patients. And however, or in addition to, I feel like probably my Brown patients, I can probably maybe relate a little bit more with, just in terms of cultural background. And that's not all of them, it's really some of them. So I think it's important, there's all these different classes that we have to take in terms of harassment training and cultural competency, but just keeping yourself open to just different ways and different cultures that can come about in your treating group or your community group, I think is important, because we see so much. It's easier to listen than to just assume that they are doing this or doing that. So I remember I cared for a patient and they came in for a fever, And I was like, okay, well, what did you give for the fever? What's going on? And as a non-neutropenic patient, what did you give for the fever? And they said what they gave, and they had given the patient a room temperature. This is a child, of course, a room temperature bath to try to bring down. They'd given some antipyretics, either Tylenol or aspirin. But then when I did a full exam, I had seen kind of a cupping. And so I have never really been exposed to the cupping kind of culturalness of the cupping, but they had done that. And so I saw that on that child's back and I knew what it was. So I didn't gasp, or I didn't really have even a big reaction. And I said, is this cupping, you know? And so they said, yes. And I don't know if everybody knows what cupping is, but basically it's a suction type of tool, holistic type of care that is usually in the I guess Asian, sometimes European settings. And so they had done that. It maybe had brought the fever down a little bit, but not enough. And so that's why they were presenting to us. So I give that example just as just being very open and culturally competent. And sometimes you haven't seen it, but you know, you just need to listen to your patients to just see kind of where their familiarities lie, so that you can give the best care.
Thank you. And I like what you said about it's easier to listen than just to assume. It's very well said. Doctora Stelamari?
Yeah, I will add to that. Thank you, Dr. Jackson, for sharing. I think one of the things that I learned during COVID when we closed the doors to families was that, especially for many of our Latino patients and many patients, like you don't make decisions in a vacuum. So you kind of rely on your family to make decisions. So I found that closing the doors to family was really the worst thing to do to really enroll patients into clinical trials, because you were giving these kind of protocols to patients. People need someone else there can listen and ask questions. And I felt like we kind of took all of that away. Telemedicine allowed us to bring some of the families back in the room. But I have to say, when I have tried to enroll patients in trials and it has taken me longer, is because I haven't kind of followed the hierarchy of the family. So I have learned that maybe I have to call the elder or the daughter or the oldest daughter in that house to have a conversation and address the issues of that person that makes decisions in that household before I kind of go on and on and on. And it is actually more time efficient. So I feel like, families are a big thing for many different cultures, but it's something that, I understand very well from my own family. And when my family members have been sick, it's not like one person goes into the hospital. It's like, 5, 6 people are there. And when someone is sick, it's a room full of people that it will be there. And that's expected in many cultures. And we need to welcome that. So I think that's one thing that COVID taught us, is that if you cut that off, patients don't do well. And it's very hard to build that trust, because you kind of have to build trust with the whole unit of the family. So hopefully we have learned something from that. And I think telemedicine is one of the things that we're all excited that hopefully can make things simpler and open some communication. We have looked at our own telemedicine experience, and it's actually the older patients are using telemedicine much more than you would expect. And I think it's because they can bring in family members and daughters and people who are at work who can join the call at the same time. So I think we have a lot more to explore with that. That's what I wanted to add.
Thank you. And how insightful comment you just made. I believe that what you said is so true, right? Latino community and how everybody in their family is involved in the patient care. And closing the doors has an impact, right? And I will go back to you, because I know that there are some tips and advices that you would like to provide later, but I'll go back to all of you later with that. So the rest of the listeners in the session can take notes. But Dr. Prishakul, anything else you would like to add with regards to cultural competency, concordance factor, and this overall need for a more inclusive behavior in the way that patient care is given?
I think that Dr. Rodriguez really hit the nail on the head with what she just said, and I echo everything about telemedicine. I really feel like one's capability to be flexible, to be adaptable, and to understand that, you know, one Latina patient family is not going to be the same as another Latina patient family. And if you get yourself, you know, thinking in that pattern, you're just setting yourself up for disaster. So just to be aware and to be adaptable is really important. I am half Thai. My dad's from Thailand and my mom is American. So I definitely was brought up in a mixed household. So I do have an experience because my dad is primarily Thai speaking. Thai was his first language, and English was his second language. And while he's been here for 30 plus years, it's still not as fluent as he would like. So I worry about him going to the doctor, and I worry about him missing something or not understanding something or not explaining something. So I always try to be involved. And because of that fear and where that comes from, I always try to make sure I don't lose sight of that when I'm seeing a patient. And if a patient comes alone, before I even start anything, I always say, do you want to get your family member on the phone? Because we have a visitor restricted policy because of COVID. Who else do you want on the phone when we're on the telemed visit? You know, who's most important to you to have during this visit? And let's get them on the line. Or if we can't, let's find a time that works better and we can reschedule, because it's so important to have those that are close to you and those that help you make treatment decision changes and important life decisions present. And I try to not lose sight of that. And I think that has helped me keep a very open mind, because that is something that I think runs true throughout multiple cultures, that it always helps to have a companion with you, whether that be a friend or a family member. Most people prefer to have someone with them to help.
This is great, and thank you for sharing, and thank you for sharing your experience as well as a daughter. This is a perfect segue to what I wanted to ask, which is what recommendations do you have to the audience, either as medical experts, patients, caregivers, that could help improve their journey throughout a clinical trial? We had a quick conversation about this, Dr. Jackson. I remember you mentioned 2 very concrete actions, but would you like to share while the rest of the panelists think about another one?
Okay, I'm going to steal you all's. Okay, so first is to use a tape recorder or something that you can record what was stated, because in those very first 2 to 3 to 4 conversations with that oncologist, it's super important to get all that information, but I know that you don't absorb it all. So I'm actually a thyroid cancer survivor, and I was diagnosed and treated all during my neuro-oncology fellowship. So even though I was basically towards the end of my training, it still was hard for me to absorb everything that was going on. So I had my recorder, which was my husband, there and present for all the appointments. And because I knew kind of oncology world and things to kind of expect, I felt okay. But sadly, I had to go through a similar type of journey with my mom. She developed breast cancer and then it recurred, and I actually lost her about 5 months ago. But I was also her tape recorder, and she actually recorded her sessions with the doctor to be able to say, what all did she say, or what all is going on? So I think that that's very important for us to be able to recall, because we all know about something called recall bias, where we think the doctor said this, we think the nurse said that, we're pretty sure that this is the next step, but it just makes it very, very hard. So that one, some having recording device either on your phone or just old school tape recorder. And then the other one is, what did I say, Lorena? Was it?
The second opinion.
A second opinion, yes. So I stress this. I stress this for all my patients. Like, you're not going to make me feel bad at all if you go to talk to somebody else about what we just talked about. You know, I want you to be thorough. I want you to be diligent. I want you to trust that the diagnosis that we gave is truthful, but do your due diligence. And you have insurance, you're paying for it, or we're paying for it. utilize all those monies, those copays, and go get a second opinion, third opinion if you want to, but definitely a second opinion. It's just super important. And if you feel like that second opinion is going to do a better job, even if it's the same diagnosis, but you feel like that second set of medical care team is going to do a better job than the first one you went to, then go. Don't feel obligated to stay with that first one, because maybe that first one isn't the best for you. Or you keep that second one in your back pocket. Whereas when the first one starts acting up, then you know that you're going to go to that second opinion and they'll be happy to receive you. So just know that you have options and choices out there. Thanks for the reminder.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. And I do hope that these two tips are taken into consideration from those patients and caregivers on the line, as these are like that, very actionable ones. Is there anything else that I saw that Dr. Prishagul was agreeing over the chat, but is there anything else that Dr. Rodriguez you want to add, or do you want me to move forward to the next question?
I like the second opinion. I'm going to quote my friend Narjas, who says that you should interview a doctor like you're interviewing the boyfriend of your daughter. You really should take time to really you're in charge. Like, I feel like many of our patients, our systems are so complicated. They feel like they have no power, but you do have power. I mean, you could go next door to another hospital, but sometimes even that hospital may have better options for you. So I think, we make our patients feel powerless in the process by just the information is kept from you. And I just want to let you know that, there is a lot, like I tell my patients when I meet them, all the clinical trials in the United States are in a database. No one is hiding any of this for you. Clinicaltrials.gov has every trial that will be run in the United States. So that's something that you have access to, and you can search by state, and you can call those investigators, and sometimes it gets difficult to travel for some trials, but there are resources out there. Some of the trials will have resources for you for transportation, and your doctors are not going to be mad if you don't choose what they're recommending. I mean, you're in charge. So if this doesn't make sense to you, it doesn't make sense, then we'll move on to something else. But I do encourage people to consider trials early, because trials, as much as we would like them to be simpler, they're still very complicated and burdensome. So they have a lot of steps. So if you wait to consider a trial until you're very, very sick in the hospital, it's just not feasible. So I think the earlier people think of trials as an option for them and potentially a better treatment. I mean, I treat patients with lung cancer, and we still cannot cure most of the patients that have lung cancer. So every patient should be interested in a clinical trial, or at least find out what's available in their area.
What you said is so important. And I one of my favorite quotes, and these are the things I needed to learn when I came here, right? But in words of Maya Angelou, people will forget what you said, but they will not forget how you made them feel. And I think that through a journey, this is truly important. And that's why this conversation is so relevant and so needed. And I couldn't be happier to share the Zoom today with you. I would like to ask a couple of questions before we wrap up. The first one is with regards to the role that you see that non-medical staff is having today within all those community outreach efforts and connection with patients. I am talking about patient navigators, community ambassadors, and all of those important roles that have increasingly taken broader responsibility during the past years. Does any of you want to comment something about it?
So I was going to say, this isn't so much in the cancer community, but I love what more they've done on the diabetes and heart disease side, where they've recruited really community advocates in the barber shops and the beauty salons, and really like boots on the ground. This is pre-COVID and now during this pandemic, to really get the word out there. Because yeah, maybe people identify with you because they do as a physician, but if it's somebody that they see weekly or monthly, at the hairdresser or grocery store or wherever, then we need to meet the people where they are. And so maybe that's not the case for every type of cancer. It definitely, the population of patients that I see, they're children with brain tumors. So maybe that's not the best avenue, but I like the idea that people are thinking outside of the box to get people engaged in clinical studies and research, such as the barbershops, the beauty salons, the churches, the youth centers and community centers. And we need to just do more of that for the oncology community as well, because we could put up flyers, but if we have actual people, recruitment, community engagement, maybe people don't have that specific type of cancer, but then they have a familiar predisposition to that, and they know that there could be potentially a trial in their academic center, so that when they do get diagnosed, or they have a family member who gets diagnosed, they know where to go and who to talk to. But we just need to put the word out more. So I love the way of engagement for all those other diseases and disorders. And I can honestly say that we haven't done so much of a great job in the oncology sphere.
Thank you. Thank you for that thought. Dr. Rodriguez?
So I think community engagement is key, and actually building resources closer to where people are. So, we know that most patients with cancer get treatment closer to home. So, I see patients that come 2 hours away, and I'm always, honored that someone will get in a car to come for 2 hours, because it's so, but then I think to myself, well, actually, they don't want to do that. I wish they had someone closer by, that they don't have to get in a car for 2 hours. And what a sacrifice we're asking people to make by not having resources closer to them. So I think, some of the community engagement can lead to partnerships where we can run trials at more of a community setting. But also physicians we have a short amount of time to really discuss trials. So I found that every time we have extenders and advocates and navigators, it reinforces the conversation and gives patients a venue to communicate better, because we're not able to communicate everything that needs to be communicated in 15 minutes. And we also have to type it at the same time and send a letter to the doctor. So it's just too much to do. And I think it really hurts patients if they don't have a face-to-face contact. So I think those navigators are key. But I think one thing that we haven't talked about, that is, I think, the big elephant in the room, is insurance. So I treat patients, and I train in New York, where there was always a public hospital across from a private hospital, and I now work at a private hospital across from a public hospital. And it's really like working like in the third world and first world. Like, our fellows take care of patients that have Medicaid. They may not have access to coverage for clinical trials. They don't have access to all the drugs. And I think that's something that limits our capacity, and something that I hope that could come out of this conversation too, because we're not going to get equity if people don't have insurance access. I mean, to come to see me, you have to have insurance. So I want to offer all our patients access, and a lot of that is financial.
Thank you for that very bold comment, which also tags to my next question. But before I get there, is there anything you would like to add, Dr. Prishagul?
I think it was very well said by Dr. Jackson and Dr. Rodriguez, and I'm so glad that you brought up financial toxicity, because it is something that it's very easy to lose sight of, especially at an academic institution where we have all these resources at our fingertips. Oh, order this test, just do this, no problem, go here, get this done. But yes, it's important to get these tests, but I always have to remind myself, pump the brakes. Let's make sure that, that the patient is aware of this. Let's see if we can go through, a different kind of pathway to get this patient this medication, or what can we do to help them? Can we look into a grant? Can we get social work involved? And I have to remind myself every day to just pump the brakes. In regards to everything that you said about, a second opinion, I totally agree. I always tell my patients, you should go where you feel most comfortable. And wherever that is, I support your decision, and whoever is taking care of you will support that decision as well. And that is really important. I just had a baby, and before I found an OB, I went to 5 different OBs to try to find the right one. And my husband was like, why are you going to so many doctors? Like, just choose one. And I was like, listen, I don't really care. I'm going to go where I feel best. And when we finally found our OB, he sat down with me in the car when we were driving home, and he was like, you were totally right. We waited and we found the right one, and I feel good. And that is just so important. Just, you will know when you find the right one, because it will just feel like a good match and you'll feel comfortable. And if that's with me, then amazing. But if it's not with me, I support you to go wherever you want to go. So that's really important. In regards to, all the different people that help take care of a patient, it really takes a village. And you may not find your support system in your family. Maybe you find it in a social media advocacy group. There's so many on Twitter. I have met so many wonderful people like Dr. Rodriguez. I connected with you through social media. Dave, who introduced me to this, Dave Bjork, who introduced me to this and helped get me on this panel. Social media is huge and it's so powerful. So get out there if you can. It's free to make a Twitter account. It's free. You just need to join. And you'd be surprised how many people you can meet and the support systems you can find. So I am a huge believer in that, and educating yourself that way. And advocacy groups, attend the big conferences. There's so many patients at ASCO. Go, immerse yourself, enjoy, and find people and advocate for yourself, because I learned so much from patients. Those are the best interactions to have at ASCO, because you learn so much from your patients. That is the biggest lesson to take from that conference for me, always.
Wow, so important and true. Thank you for sharing. And I see that people is congratulating you for the baby as well. So I think that this, like the next question that I have is, we've talked about this multifactorial kind of need, right? All the way from the health literacy, the cultural sensitivity, the language, the messaging, the imagery, the trusted voices and the messengers, the financial toxicity itself, logistics. I want to talk a little bit right now about the eligibility criteria and the way that trials are designed. And I wanted to hear from you what's your belief around that inclusion and exclusion criteria that sometimes inadvertently is eliminating those patients that need to participate in a trial because of the higher incidence or prevalence. Is this something that you experience? Can you think about some potential solutions to this?
Oh, I have to start there because so I do phase 1 clinical trials, and phase 1 clinical trials, as you may know, they're testing new drugs, and some of them may have unforeseen side effects. So the companies are very invested in the development of these drugs, and they want the drugs to do well, the patients to do well. So they're looking for the perfect patient, which is a big problem, because if you want treatments for every patient, who is this perfect patient? Like, who is a patient that has had 3 lines of chemotherapy and has a hemoglobin of 10 or 12 or 13? Who is the patient who has insurance that can get a new CAT scan because we fell out of the window by 1 day? So there's a lot of ways that it's too cumbersome, and it doesn't mirror standard treatment. And there's no surprise that many patients cannot enroll or will not enroll, or doctors won't refer them, because it's so much simpler to just treat your patient the way you would treat them in your standard practice. And clinical trials don't really mirror that. And we have to change that. And I think I also feel like it's also a big business that is very complicated. It has a lot of stakeholders. And for example, we were talking about consent. Like, I always think every time we have a trial, there has to be a new consent, that it has to be tested in a new set of patients. And some trials come and it will be 6 months before they get a consent. And I'm like, couldn't we just get a universal consent that it kind of covers most of it, and then some details? I just feel like it just gets very cumbersome, and we make it some of it is more complicated than it should be for patients. And so I hope something good comes out of it in terms of, after COVID, increasing access. But I think advocates have been asking for that for a long time, that trials have less financial toxicity, that they're more accessible, and they mirror more regular practice, which right now these protocols are looking for superhumans. I don't know. We're looking for patients that don't really exist, or very rare in some cases.
Thank you for being so transparent on that answer. It's needed. It's needed for us to hear it. Can you think about anything else to add to this, Dr. Jackson or Dr. Prishago?
I would just say the oncology world has gotten a little bit better with dealing with type of rare tumors, because that is a patient population that people have looked less at because the amount of patients is so small. But still, if they're rare tumors, we don't know what treatment options there are. So I like the fact that we've done a little bit better in the past few years with expansion and thinking about tumors that we don't often see, but still need to have trials to look at if treatment X, Y, or Z will work. So I think that that's helped with improving enrollment in that case, but still we're at a crossroads with even dealing with the main type of cancers such as lung and breast, and somewhat brain. So we have a long ways to go. So I just say in that regards.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Can I chime in about just something quick?
Please.
I agree with everything that that you both said. But one thing that I think is something that we are kind of moving away from, but that really is ageism. And I feel like geriatric oncology is really a big up and coming field. Our patients are not only living longer, but we're getting diagnosed at an older age because cancer is also, unfortunately, a disease of the older population as well. So I think, including older patients in clinical trials is so important. We're so afraid that they're frail or they're weak or they're going to ruin the data, which I don't believe is true. I have so many super fit 80-plus-year-old patients that are way more fit than like a 50-year-old patient. An 80-something-year-old patient would be a great trial candidate because they're motivated. They maybe have better lab values, they may have a better performance status, but because of their age, they're not allowed to be included. So I really think that broadening that, I don't think there should be an age limit. Obviously for adult patients, we have 18, you must be 18 and older. And I think performance status is another thing, but age, I think if you're fit and you're motivated and your disease would benefit from this, I think they should be considered.
So important, and thank you for bringing up the relevance of demographic and non-demographic characteristics as well. There are so many things that are seen and so many others that are not, but all of them impact the clinical trial journey of patients and caregivers. I fully agree. I think that so far we have kind of focused a lot of the efforts around the industry in increasing racial and ethnic representation, but so much more for everyone to do on this important field and in all the other characteristics, as you well said. We will shortly tap into the questions from the audience. I see that the chat is on fire and I am very happy about that. But before that, I would like to ask you guys to provide a call to action to everyone who is listening today. Do you think, what recommendations do you think you could provide to them so they go back to their own setting, home, institution, company, and do something around increasing clinical trial diversity? Can you think about a recommendation for them?
I really liked Dr. Preshigo's recommendation to be involved in social media. So there's some pros and cons in that aspect, but the pro would be that you can develop positively a community of your cancer or of your research area and really connect. Because I know when it came time for me to go to a conference pre-pandemic, and I presented my findings, it wasn't at a just pediatric oncology conference. It was a pediatric oncology conference that was sponsored by a patient advocacy group, specifically for midline gliomas of the brain. So it's those communities, those groups that are really wanting to know what availabilities there are for clinical trials and treatment options. And so if you connect with those groups earlier on and sustain that connection, it makes it easier to engage for future reference.
Great. Thank you. Any addition from Dr. Rodriguez or Dr. Appreciable?
I mean, I think I guess I would like my patients and every patient to feel that it's about them and they're in charge. And if you don't understand, you have every right to ask a million more questions, and you have every right to ask for another visit to discuss again. You should be given documents that you can read at home with your family, albeit some of them are complicated for not great reason, but you have the right. You have the right to ask for questions. You have the right to ask for another opinion, and hopefully you'll be able to get the best care by advocating for yourself. So don't let anyone tell you that you can't. It has nothing to do with insurance. It's your right.
Thank you. Thanks for the reminder. And Dr. Appreciable, any addition?
Yeah, I agree. I always tell my patients that they are part of this team, but they are the captain of the team. It is not me. It is not my nurse. It is them. And all of the decisions need to be made by them. I'm here to kind of guide you. I'm here to give you the options. I will never suggest anything that would cause you harm, but the decision is never going to be coming from me. And that is the most important thing, because you as the patient are the one that has to go through the treatment. You have to go through the side effects. You're the one that might be on the couch on the weekend not feeling well. And I want you to feel comfortable that when you've made your decisions and you leave the office, that everything that you did, you know you did because you were the one to make that decision and you felt good about it. And that's, if we ever lose sight of that, then I've done something wrong. So that's the most important thing to me.
Thank you very much, and I love the analogy of the captain of the team. so it's great. I could definitely continue this conversation over and over, but I know that some members of the audience have some questions that they would like us to go through. So let me just, MC, should I just start reading them, right? Let me just go back because I can't multitask. I am very bad multitasking. So I just want to have some of these questions answered. So let me take the first one. Audience question. This is so interesting. Thank you all. The informed consent process is, of course, an important part of research. While it is meant to be written to be as simple and accessible as possible, we all know they can often be lengthy and complicated. Do you all have any experience with how an informed consent document or other study materials was revised or rewritten to foster diversity and encourage a wider array of individuals to feel comfortable consenting?
That is such a great point. You know, I have still some of the large corporative trials that have allow you to have different chemotherapies. Well, I remember giving a consent to a patient of mine, and he was going to go on the standard treatment, which is observation, or these chemotherapies, many of them which were standard of care. But there were so many pages going into every side effect of every medication that he was not even going to get because it was not part of what we were doing. And it was just so overly consuming that yes, there's an effort out there to make some of these trials, but that effort has to start early and it has to involve patients because they're the ones who are reading these documents. And I hope that I know some of the cooperative groups have advocates that sit as part of the committees that develop the trials. And little by little, I think things are changing in the right direction, but still not yet. We're not where we need to be.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. In addition, so let me go to the next one. And thank you, Dr. Dr. Rodriguez. Another question for the panelists. What do you say to those patients with rare cancers and having difficulty finding trials? I know some who feel defeated and left out. Any thoughts?
It does come to be a time sometime where there isn't a treatment option in a clinical trial for rare cancers and not so rare cancers. So I'd recommend at those times, hopefully you have a very competent, very diligent oncology team, but I'd recommend that they present your case at a kind of cooperative, what we call tumor board, where it'd be the hospital system that you're going to, but then potentially other hospital systems. And depending on what the disease is or what the cancer is, you would be talking to, your doctor would be talking to other experts within the field and say, hey, I have this patient with X, Y, and Z. I've tried this already. I know that they're not eligible for your clinical trial or your clinical trial, but what have you used in the past for patients like this? So just kind of a all around powwow with other experts in the field. No, you wouldn't be eligible for a clinical trial, but at least there could potentially be other patients that had a similar type of diagnosis, and great minds are coming together to think about what the best treatment option could be. So I would really advocate for your case to be presented at a more global or community-based tumor board.
I would add to that two things. One, that there are compassionate use protocols that are available for rare cancers, and we have a couple of those at the University of Miami. And actually, one of these trials, a patient brought to us. He said he researched it. He's like one of the 100 people in the country that had this diagnosis, and he knew this company before I knew about the company had a drug in development, and we reached out, and the trial is just open for him. And we're going to have another patient that comes from the other coast of Florida that has the same rare diagnosis, that because of this experience that was really initiated by a patient, we have that as an access. The other thing I would add to that is that, you know, in this era of more genetic information, we have opened new treatments for tumor agnostic treatments for patients that have different tumor types with the same mutation. So I think it's one thing that has really changed oncology is really getting more genetic information. It has opened the door for more treatment options. And there's two big trials by the NCI, the MASH trial that would match your genetic sequencing to a possible trial in development, and the TAPER trial, we also have that open, and we have been able to find options for patients. And actually, that's one great example of a trial that was developed by ASCO with advocates, and they try to make it very simple, where like you can keep the patient on treatment as long as the patient and the investigator feel is benefiting it. It doesn't have a lot of stop rules. And I thought that that's an experience that we all need to learn from, that if you have a rare mutation and this is your one treatment, we should let you, there should be some kind of flexibility in terms of how long you can be on that treatment. You know, obviously with some safety limits, but there should be more flexibility, especially for rare diagnoses.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. Thank you very much. There's another question in the chat. Dr. Apreciable, do you want to add something, or should I go to this one?
I want to make sure we get through the questions. I would just add, make sure that you have next generation sequencing done. That is the deeper testing on your tumor that will potentially open more treatment options for you, especially if you have a rare tumor. You may be a candidate for a phase 1 trial that you didn't even know was an opportunity for you. So ask your doctor if they have done next generation sequencing on your tumor always, no matter what your tumor type, no matter your stage, no matter your diagnosis.
Thank you. And so many good tips that we're all taking notes. So I appreciate that. The next question is for Dr. Jackson. You shared the story about the woman that you met at the grocery store and how she expressed reluctance towards going to your hospital because they were conducting experiments on people. I was curious as to what your response would be to that incident today. How would you respond to a patient who was hesitant to clinical trials? Thank you, Neha, for your question.
Thank you, Neha, for your question. I mean, that's a good question. How I respond at the grocery store trying to get home at the end of the day when I'm tired to somebody is totally different than how I would respond to them in the actual clinical room and they're interested. So to be honest, probably I would respond the same way as what I did before in terms of her saying, oh, you think so? Because I'm trying to get home and cook dinner. But in my room, I would say, you know, tell me what hesitance you have. Tell me what you know about what clinical trials are, and how can I educate you even more about this clinical trial that you're now eligible for? So I would really question them about their hesitancy, question them about what they know a clinical trial even is, because some people have in their mind that truly it is just an experiment, Whereas a clinical trial, honestly, may be just tacking on a few more sessions of talking to an oncologist or talking to a therapist, and they just want to know kind of mind, body, and spirit, what is going on with you. So there's different types of trials. It's all dependent on the questions that the PI is wanting to ask, or is the answers that the PI is wanting to obtain. So again, I probably would have the same response because I was trying to get home, but in my room or in the hospital setting, I definitely would be a lot more patient and wanting to know why she's thinking like that. I kind of knew, but how I could shift her mindset so that she would be more open for herself and potentially her family members.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And speaking of that, I would like to thank the Liz, who actually posted another question right now, which I think is very important. I will read it as it is. So thank you for that authenticity. I have bladder cancer, and I am wondering, when does the patient's desire for quality of life come into play when the treatment protocol is not radical? I know several patients who have been dealing with recurring non-invasive diagnosis, but doctors refuse to do radical cystectomy in order to give them a decent quality of life. Instead, they are constantly having the procedures, enduring constant catheterization and incontinence, increasing pain, and lack of social lives. So what do you think, or what are your thoughts around when does that quality of life goes over? Yeah, what are your thoughts around that?
You know, I think that's something that we haven't covered, and it's such a important part of clinical trials. You know, most clinical trials get power to measure progression-free survival, but if whatever survival you have, if you're dealing with side effects that are long-lasting and they impact your quality of life, and I think the question really relates to some treatments can be very innovative and they can be very exciting, but they make your day-by-day experience very burdensome. Are we really getting good progression-free survival by adding toxicity? And that's, we have seen the advent of immunotherapy that at face value, it's better than chemotherapy. You don't have neutropenic fever, you don't have hair loss, but we are seeing patients that are staying on treatments after surgery. Now we have that approved for lung cancer. And we have therapies that people will take for a year, for 2 years, and we haven't really measured very well long-term complications. And when you see patients, and I know Isabel has treated patients for a long time in immunotherapy, these things are real. They impact but you get fatigue, you can get adrenal insufficiency that kind of impacts your whole life, like how you wake up and how you go to bed, and rash, diarrhea. I mean, some of the drugs have gotten better, but I feel that part of the problem is that we are not measuring quality of life appropriately. So we need patients to help us in that effort and really be strong advocates for that.
Thank you. So insightful. Thank you for the question and for the response, Dr. Rodriguez. Like you said, Dr. Appreciable, they're the captains of their team, right? So well said. Let me go to the last question before we wrap it up. There are many stakeholders involved in clinical research. Would you have a specific request to pharma to improve the diverse patient experience?
They have all the money, so they could utilize that. Now, this is me speaking as a government employee, where all patients that come to us do not have to pay out of pocket. But there is something to be said about the drug companies that do have a lot of money. This is the last time that I probably will be ever offered to come be a part of BMS type of activities. But I think it's a big deal to have really great patient advocates. I think it's an underutilized resource and tool that every patient should have. So I can just speak from my own personal experience. I was my mom's patient advocate, and I was there virtually for these appointments over this last year. And she was just so grateful because she would ask me things because I was her daughter, but she would ask me more things because I was an oncologist. And I enjoyed explaining things to her. It also made me sad because I'm having to explain things to my mother, who actually is going through this diagnosis. But she was so grateful, and even her oncologists were grateful that I would explain things in her presence and after the meeting, after the visits. And I just could see that my information, my knowledge, my experience in taking care of patients and myself having cancer, it really made a difference. So if in any way the drug companies and or government, I'll put government in there so I don't get too much in trouble, could normalize having patient advocates for each and every patient, at least for cancer patients, I'll say, because I'm partial to them. But we don't know everything. And the patient definitely doesn't know everything. But if potentially they had somebody holding their hand all through the process, in addition to a family member, I think that that would help things along really nicely. And I don't know if that comes from the drug company, or that comes from the government, or that comes from the hospital system, or all of the above. But it sure would be nice to have somebody hold your hand throughout the whole process.
Thank you. Beautiful answer. And please always make us uncomfortable. That is what we need, honestly. So please, we're authentic here, and this is a very safe space. Anything you would like to add, Dr. Rodriguez or Dr. Aprishago? Perfect. So with that, I would like to go for final remarks from each of you before I hand it over to my colleague Megan. Before that, really big thank to the entire great team, to Dave, Megan, Dr. Platt, Andrea, Katie, and Jess. And thank you for the PBRGs from Bristol Myers Squibb for joining us and preparing and putting all these together. I think that there are more sessions coming, and this has been great. On my end, I can only say that I'm hoping that all that is happening today becomes like has a permanent impact, right? And that the way that clinical trials are run in the future already has diversity incorporated to it. I also need to highlight that Bristol Myers Squibb is deepening its commitment. Bristol Myers Squibb and the Bristol Myers Squibb Foundation, each of them looking into ways to improve clinical trial representation, clinical trial diversity representation, and we have a long-term commitment to that, and we're investing resources into that. But again, I'm looking forward to continue these conversations happening, to be very authentic, to hear what the patients need to say, to understand what the caregivers are saying, but more importantly, to open our conversations to partners like you, who are in the forefront, who are diverse, who are trailblazers, and who are understanding what's happening. So please, let's have a quick round of final remarks. Dr. Aprishago.
I would like to say, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be part of this outstanding discussion this evening. I learned so much. I've been scribbling down like notes like crazy over here for thoughts that I have and things I want to talk about with my team. I am so appreciative to the patients and the advocates and everyone that commented in the chat here and shared their stories and was courageous enough to ask questions. And I don't lose that courage, and please be your best advocate, and don't forget that you are the captain. That is the most important thing. You absolutely are. And if you ever are made to feel that you are not, it's not the right fit for you. Don't lose sight of that. And I look forward to being part of more of these discussions and learning more. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aprishago. Dr. Estela Mari.
Again, thank you so much for the invitation, and this really has been very powerful. This is something that we're passionate about in the university, enrolling more patients and increasing access, but we have a ways to go. I mean, besides everything that has been mentioned about feeling empowered and using each other and using advocates to learn from each other, I find that pharma, CROs, all the big machine of research has a lot of power. So if you don't see diversity, then don't fund research that is not diverse. Like if you don't see investigators of color, then go somewhere else. I mean, there's a lot to be done. And I know there's a lot of pressures to get drugs approved, and some drugs that I treat patients with have been 85% trials outside of the United States because it's easier and there are more patients and it's a whole different scenario. But we have to invest in research, and at the end of the day, we have to be so thankful to patients that have contributed really their lives and to increase the knowledge. And thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. And Dr. Jackson?
Yeah, I don't know what closing remarks to give, but I'm just so thankful to be here, to be invited. You all were great panelists to be here with me, and I enjoyed answering these questions, and we have a lot more work to do. And I just encourage the passion to be able to answer more questions and to think of more questions. So I'm here until I'm not here.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the three of you. You have been fantastic and made this so much easier for me. This was great. Thank you for all the listeners for the session. And Megan, the Zoom is yours.
Again, thank you everyone for joining this session. And for more information or additional questions, check the chat. You can email us at diversityandoncology@grithealth.com. And we will let you know when the recording of this session is available. And our third session will be improving representation of diversity in clinical trials through academia and community collaboration. And that will be held in January. So more details to come. And also look for a survey after the session that we hope you will complete. And thank you again for joining us today. Everyone have a good night.